So let's go ahead and get started. This is essentially exercise 6, part 2. And to be fair, we're kind of going back and forth a little bit here. Honestly, I want to do 3 parts for exercise 6 just because it can be a lengthy one. And, well, to be fair, most of our students, they're going to kind of go through this a little bit in Graphics 3 and Graphics 4, especially if they have myself or Kernodle or even Longoria, right? Especially, we're kind of the digital guys, if you will. But just to recover from last time, or to revamp, we finally got our exploded axonometric. We had a couple of floor plans from last time. And relatively speaking, I want you to kind of get used to this idea that all the drawing is done in Rhino. I mean, if that's not obvious by now, that it is way easier to select things. It is way easier to label things. It is way easier to change things and trim things and draw, right? Essentially in Rhino. So don't get me wrong, get into the habit of really exhausting what we can do with these pieces. Because for instance, I can always fix things too. I don't necessarily need to keep those things, and it's a lot easier to delete them. And again, just really overall drawing can't be said enough that you really need to utilize this program before we start going through the workflow. So today, I'm going to go through the workflow, honestly, a little bit today. I'm not sure how I chopped, my clipping plane's in the way. There we go. But I do want to actually produce a couple of drawings and almost act like I'm finished with the drawing portion, even though, of course, for the sake of tutorial, I'm not really. But I would like to dive into the workflow and work steps because I do want to start training you on some of how the other programs work. Don't get me wrong. I think I've definitely given you enough to bite on in terms of Rhinoceros. And to be fair, we didn't even get over all of it. We just went over little basic modeling techniques that we could possibly apply in architecture. To be absolutely fair, I can't wait to see what you guys come back with in 3 years, right? When you've really gone through the entire architecture studio process and really have utilized these programs for what they are. However, to save us some time in those next 3 years, again, the first thing I could say is definitely do all your drawing in Rhino or AutoCAD or some sort of vectorized program that selects better than Illustrator, to say the very least. However, I did actually want to get a section involved, so I'm going to go ahead and make a section real quick. Go ahead and take that. Of course, I need to go to a different view. Another thing that I would say is make sure that you're kind of picking the right views here. I mean, if you can't see it, switch to a shaded view, see what you're actually slicing into. For instance, maybe I want to show the stairs and how that works. So just be cognizant, right, to say the very least. However, at mine, it looks like my clipping plane just stopped working. That's okay. We'll go to our properties and we'll make sure that it's in each of our views, just in case you didn't get that either. So we'll take that. I'll click on the viewport that I want to make 2D. So I'll type in make 2D, enter. In my case, make sure that you select maintain source layers. And I don't really need hidden lines in this case. It'd be kind of insane. You could try. But really, I only use the hidden lines if I know that I'm going to put a rendering inside. That way I can kind of give like this ghostly appearance and really show off some of those graphic abilities. But in my case, I just need that section. I don't know why it keeps making it off in the middle of nowhere, but that's okay. We'll go ahead and put it there. It's looking pretty sweet. But let's go ahead and isolate those a little bit better. And let's go ahead and take off my clipping plane. So if we were to say take a look at the final requirements, we would notice that there's a couple more things, right? Such as 3 floor plans, at least 1 section, process diagrams, which is really exercise 3. Some of you guys, wonderful stuff, but you definitely want to show the observer the one that you picked, right? Don't get me wrong, some students will even go, look, I did 3 different ones, but the biggest one is the one that we went with. So, I mean, don't get me wrong, a lot of students kind of, you can either take it this way or that way. For some students, they were basing their design off of an instrument, so they wanted to be a little bit more telling in terms of how they developed some of their diagrams. So don't get me wrong, you could revamp exercise 3 if you wanted to. You're going to have to, right? Because, well, it was all landscape, and you'll at least need to reformat it to a portrait mode. Keep in mind that each of these drawings are all in portrait, 11 by 17, no bigger, no smaller. And really what we want to keep track of is definitely the scale today, which I'll go over and mentioned a little bit last time. But that being said, let's say I was finished producing all my drawings. Let's say I got all 3 floor plans, I got my section, I got my exploded diagram, and I was ready to go. I was ready to start putting this in Illustrator. I'm still not ready yet. The first thing that I want to do is actually make this to scale. However, I don't really want to change the model. After all, everything was at 1:1. So very simply put, all you'll need is, well, arguably just a calculator. And you can actually produce any scale that you need or want, and whether it's engineering scale or architectural scale. But in our case, I need to make them 1/4 inch equals a foot. So how do I do that? Well, essentially, if I dimension something right now, it should be true size. So if I do DIM, I click on something, it's going to say a lot of millimeters, right, to say the very least. Of course, I can change my units. Actually, I think I can change my dim units. So if I type in dim and set dim, not sure what that did. Oh, I guess you have to have an object selected. Let's try that again. Millimeter small, how about no? So it's still stuck in millimeters. Is it my units? No, it's not my units. Annotation styles, there we go. Well, we don't want millimeters small, so I'm gonna go to annotation tile and just go to millimeter architectural, see if that makes a difference. Even though it'll still be in millimeters, that stinks. Perhaps we can change some things. No. Arrows. Man, we can get down to the arrow changes. That's pretty cool. But obviously I want to switch to feet and inches, and really change anything that, obviously not decimals or degrees. You could change it to radians, minutes, seconds. Some of this stuff might be kind of a reminder of previous math classes and things like this. Obviously I'm changing my template of millimeter architecture, so I'm going to change it to just architecture. That's sweet. Let's go ahead and try again. DIM. Better. 48 feet exactly, right? So definitely a little bit more architectural. I'm not sure why it got gigantically huge, but maybe it's trying to tell me something. My eyesight is really that bad. So, but never a bad idea to verify these things. And again, if you want to change the style, just make sure you go to dim style. Anyway, so we can concur that that's 48 feet, but in our case, I want to make it actually 1/4 size. Funny enough, the easiest thing that you can do is actually change the paper size that you put it on, right? And since all of these need to relatively be close to scale, the only one that doesn't need to be to scale is, of course, the exploded axon. To be fair, you could make it a true scale if it was a perfect axon like our military projection. That would be true scale. However, an isometric or a perspective is not to scale because, well, they converge at some point. The dimensions that we actually measure on them aren't the actual scale that they are. They're receding, right, due to the optics of like our eye. But in our case, maybe I want to switch that to 11 by 17. So, well, in my case, I'm going to make a layer and call it paper space. I know I already have so many layers, but let's call it paper space. That way I don't lose track of it. And to be fair, I won't even actually use it except to align my artboards on both Photoshop and Illustrator. So I'm going to switch to paper space. Let's make it a little bit easier to look at. Let's go with white. And let's just basically make a rectangle. So in my case, I need to keep that ratio of 11 by 17. So I'm going to do 11 feet by 17 feet. And I'm going to notice that, well, as long as I can keep this ratio, I'm pretty solid, especially for drawings that I know that I don't need a scale to. So for instance, that's starting to fit on the page really well. Right, and we get a pretty decent exploded axon. However, you'll notice that I'm not really keeping track of the size, and right now it's relatively gigantic compared to really the true scale and size of these objects. I mean, we're talking like there's San Pedro Springs Park, you know, just a gigantic rectangle. But in our case, you might find that you can fit 2 or possibly just 1 floor plan on each. So we may have a few pages. But in that case, I know that the paper space can only hold so much feet at a certain scale. So for instance, the first thing that I need to know to scale something digitally is the paper size that I want to use. I've already given that to you. It's 11 by 17. However, at 11 by 17, at a scale of 1/4, I can only fit 4 feet per inch. So if there's 11 inches times 4 feet, how many feet can I hold? 11 times 4, right? So 44 feet. In my case, I'm going to start a new rectangle. Again, my paper space. And I'm going to do 44 feet. Enter. And then 17. So 17 feet times 4, because I can fit 4 feet per 17 inches. So 17 times 4 is 68 feet. So in my case, I'm going to type in 68 feet. And that is an 11 by 17 piece of paper. You'll notice it's the same ratio, but it's the size that'll make it true on our object. Now, I don't know about you, but remember my object's a little bigger, right? I didn't stay within the realm of possibility. And you may have or may not have also, right? So don't get me wrong, I think I'm finding out quickly I can't even fit mine. Well, at least the topography and everything. So I might have to chop off my topography a little bit. And it doesn't look like I'm going to be able to fit 2 floor plans. It looks like definitely only one is going to fit, and that's okay, right? At least for the sake of this project. But what's nice is now I can come back and label that. So I will label it, in my case, 11 by 17. That way I know the paper size, and at a 1/4 scale. So 1/4 inch equals 1 foot, 0 inches. And that's pretty important because, well, to be fair, I might need that again, right? Especially in your case, right? You definitely will, because we're going to have multiple sheets. So I usually put it on the outside of the paper. That way, just in case I forget it or something. But I can go ahead and copy that whole thing, right? Well, in my case, don't get me wrong, for the project, I'm supposed to do it at 1/4, right? However, what if it was in studio and I still needed that on 11 by 17? Well, I do the exact same thing. It's that easy. I know that I have 11 by 17. I can fit 11 inches on 11 by 17 paper by 17 inches. So I'm going to do 11 times 8, which is 88. Oh, rectangle. So I'm going to do 88 feet. Enter. And I know that 17 times 8, because I can fit 8 feet, is 136 feet. So I can fit 136 feet at 1/8 scale because, well, the scale got smaller. So I can fit more stuff. I don't know, does it look like I can fit more stuff? Yeah, right? And that's because the model actually got a little bit smaller on the paper space. Now what maybe confuses most students is, sir, you didn't change any of the drawing. I know, why the heck would I do that, right? When I can just change the rectangle. You see what I'm saying here? Now, don't get me wrong, not a lot of professors know about this, right? I will say I like to teach it this way because it's simple, right? And I can change it to 1/32 scale. I can change it to 1/30 scale. I can do all of that by just changing a rectangle. The other guy, you know what he has to do, or gal? They have to go into each viewport and change the scale of that viewport. Now, don't get me wrong, that is how you're technically supposed to do it, right? And you'll learn that when you get to a firm. And to be fair, Revit does that for you automatically. So I think you're going to learn that. I like to teach that where it makes sense in the program, right? I'd rather teach it to you this way. That way you know for a fact that you can get the right answer every time without accidentally moving stuff around. So don't get me wrong, if you wanted to look into that, you could write down today, viewport scaling in Rhino. That you're going to find the technical way. To be fair, I like to call this the rectangle paper space method. Right, which, to be arguably fair, I can do multiple scales in one viewport, which, by the way, it can't do. Right, so I don't know which way is better, but I like my way better. So, but that being the case, right, I can obviously make a copy of this. Want to keep track of it, and I may have actually multiple pieces of paper, multiple scales. I mean, you guys know this is very true in architecture. You often get lots of different requests for scales and site plans and all these different things where you can just put the image in 1:1, change the paper space, print, call it a day, right? And you'll of course see what I mean by that today. So that's at 1/8 space. So I'm going to do a couple today. And obviously, it's kind of already, it's almost too small. But, you know, if you're finding that some of your stuff isn't scaling correctly, that's absolutely fine. Just make sure that you either put a graphic scale or at least some sort of indication that you change scales for us. This would be fine though. We don't necessarily need all of the topography and things like that. After all, of course, I can even trim it, and I don't even need to keep that information. Right, so of course I can trim. It's not going to trim anything that it's not touching, but in my case I do need to ungroup things. Ungroup, maybe even explode some things, and really just trim things out. Obviously I want to get rid of anything that I don't need, and I can make it a little easier on myself in Illustrator and Photoshop. But relatively speaking, what we're doing today for Photoshop is, well, making a coloring book. Essentially is what I like to call it, because we're giving ourselves some lines. We already did the drawing, we already did this stuff, did the calculations, did all the work, if you will. Some of you guys are like still sitting there trying to like make stuff in Illustrator when you can draw a new line. Call it annotations, right? Which is what those are called when we annotate our drawings. Let's do a light gray. But we can draw these things and we can add line weights later. Some of you guys are like, yeah, well, can I draw an arrow? Yeah, you totally can. We can take those pieces, mirror it. Don't get me wrong, we don't have to do that like every single time. We could take the exact same thing, copy. And we can really make it easier on ourselves, right? Pole in the way, who cares? We'll make it just right for us. And so on and so forth, right? But again, I can't express this enough. It's way easier to do that here than Illustrator. I see some of you guys still struggling today. Don't opt out and be lazy on me here, right? Do the work where the work is in the right spot. However, from here, right, we could dissect things. We can get it just dialed in right. We can find that certain areas are probably chopped off at a certain area or not. I kind of just arbitrarily did it for the sake of tutorial, but of course you'll know your project even better. In some cases, I mean, I could even fake it more, right? I could kind of leave it off. Maybe you don't like that hard line, and maybe you'd rather extend it, right? So in my case, I'm going to extend my lines. That's kind of cool. How about this one? Oh, can't extend that one too far. It's trying. There we go. But some people ask me, you know, can we extend other lines as well? It's like, yeah. Come on. There we go. And just click, 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 click. So, I mean, don't get me wrong. You can keep drawing, right, to say the very least. That's already looking pretty cool. That way I can take advantage of the entire page. Doesn't necessarily need to cut off there, but maybe I'm going to put some information or graphic scale and north arrow down here. So maybe I let that be. I'm not sure. But again, well, what if man, I have a professor who's like, no, change that to 1/8. It's like, man, I don't want to do that all over again. Well, I would just take this copy, put one off to the side, and boy, I have my paper space that's already to scale. In fact, I had a friend, he would just make all these paper spaces. He had a whole file just like of rectangles already calculated. He had all his 24x36s at all the scales that he would use. He had all of his 11x17s he would just drag them over because he was tired of doing that calculation every time. To me, it doesn't really bother me. I just pull out my calculator, 11 times 4, no big deal. That way, at least I know that I did it correctly. In his case, he saved himself a lot of time, right? Of course, just shifting that over. Make that a little brighter. But yes, look, I didn't have to do anything. I just put it in the paper space, and now it's the right size. So again, I can't express that enough. But something that I maybe haven't really gone over a whole lot is the idea of hatching and pochette. So in my case, I did want to run over that a little bit today just because it'll become important as we go into Photoshop and Illustrator today. So in my case, let's say this was my section. Yeah, I know it's abysmal. I think it's missing the stairs. That's okay. For the sake of tutorial today, that'll do just fine. But in your case, of course, you're going to want to make sure that you're cutting in the right spot, make sure that you got all the right things. In my case, I'm exploding it and ungrouping it so I can further manipulate it. So I'm going to ungroup first, then I'm going to explode it. That way I can get rid of all these little lines in here because that's kind of silly. I'd rather that be poché, but I'm accidentally getting rid of some of the stuff I need. So in my case, I'm going to take everything, trim it. Let's see if I can trim everything in here. There we go. A little bit better in terms of a hard line there. There we go. Kind of a lot going on there. I may have to fake it till I make it and just make a polyline. When in doubt, I mean, just make a new line, right? Shoot. Fake it till you make it, right? So this will be my cut line, if you will. Obviously faking it a little bit. So just kind of retracing it. And I just want to kind of show you this stuff, guys, that nobody has to know. In fact, that's what makes this program a little bit better than, say, AI, or there's a lot more changeability. I could take that piece, go ahead and delete everything I don't need, and that'll be my poché for today, right? So I take that curve instead, hatch it. In my case, click inside, hit enter, and call it a day. We'll either make it solid or we'll make it actually a bunch of hatch lines. We'll set it at a rotation of 45 degrees. And my goodness, right? We didn't have to do any of that work, right? That we normally would in Graphics 2, Graphics 3. However, I'm also cutting through other parts of my section. So I'm going to go ahead and hatch it again. And basically just click on the areas that I know I want to be cutting through. May have to cut through quite a few. And maybe I'm cutting through this wall as well. But again, I'm going to do all the work, if you will, the drawing work, the figuring out layers, the making sure that I have all the pieces or what's being cut through. All in this program. Can't express that enough. I'm going to press OK. In my case, I'm going to keep those solid. And bam. You know, we're definitely at a lot better spot to put this in Illustrator. I would do the same thing in Rhino, or sorry, for my floor plans. So again, hatch. All the parts that are being cut through. Right? As long as I'm in that boundary mode. So combine regions. Sometimes it says combine regions or it literally says boundary. Don't really need one there. Keep in mind that if I'm clicking all of these together, that it does put that as in one part. So I'd want to do that for my floor plan part and then enter. I'd want to do it for another floor plan part. I wouldn't like do the whole drawing in one piece just because, well, that hatch is like considered a component. So if you move one, it's going to accidentally move it off of this drawing. Whereas if you did it per drawing, it's going to stay with that drawing. Does that make sense? Hopefully so. But again, want to make sure that I get all the pieces that I'm cutting through. Oop, almost forgot one. But see what I mean? Like I wouldn't go to this drawing. You know, keep one hatch per drawing. So that's looking good. Enter. That way if I accidentally move it, oh, dang. Well, maybe it's not all one component. That's kind of nice. Well, scratch that. I mean, I guess now you can essentially do it all at once. But you used to, like if you did that at the same time as these other ones, it would definitely move it. But good to know. Sweet. That's pretty sweet. It treats them as individual objects now. So again, not a big deal. Glad to see that there's some changes. I'd probably do a rendered view to this one, especially with some hidden lines and things like that. But just to kind of recap what we're doing in there. However, this is looking pretty good, right? In terms of 11 by 17 not to scale, 11 by 17 to scale, and you know, that was just for the sake of tutorial today, so I'm just going to remove that. But that's looking pretty good, and I know it seems like, oh wow, this is really weird, there's a lot of different sizes going on. Not a big deal. So from here, well, let's go for it, right? So for today, I can't do everything at once in a tutorial. I'm going to go ahead and do these two and just basically export them. So I'm going to highlight the whole piece, file, export selected. Adobe Illustrator, in this case, I'm going to make sure that I label it correctly. So like floor plan 1, exercise 6, and lines, or line work is sometimes what I call it. I'm gonna go ahead and put it on desktop, export. In my case right here, don't get me wrong, some people can do this. What's important about this particular, I just never got to go over it, is that you want to make sure that your units are correct. So for instance, 1 foot in this program, what does it equal in inches? Well, it equals 0.25 inches. But again, that was only for one scale, right? So keep that in mind. You can do it this way. Since we did it in the rectangle box method, honestly, you could check either of those. It doesn't really matter, which is even better, right? So a lot of times some students will just snapshot the current view because they know that they're just going to size it to the artboard piece of paper anyway. But I'll go ahead and do it both ways. So we'll do the true method. What really stinks is you can't see the air quotes that I'm doing, but hopefully you can tell by the way that I'm sounding. Oh, I want to go over that as well. Don't let me forget. But let's go ahead and open up Illustrator. And again, make sure you open up that Illustrator file. That way you can maintain your layers and things like that. So we'll go to exercise. Well, that's not the right exercise 5. Open. Desktop. There it is. So floor plan 1, exercise. And you could press update or choose. Basically it's saying, hey, this is like a legacy text. It doesn't know what to do with that font. It's not a big deal. You can just update that font. But you'll also notice right away, you're like, where is it? It's nowhere to be seen, right? And you may want to double check some stuff. So if you go to your layers and immediately select something, you'll be like, oh, there it is, right? Way off in the distance, or somehow, you know, like can't be selected. And well, essentially the middle of our paper space, and I may have never explained this, but the middle of our paper space is 0, 0. So if your stuff isn't at 0, 0, well, it's not going to show you it because, well, technically speaking, 0, 0 is over here and your stuff is over here. So in Illustrator, my stuff is actually way off the page. Does that make sense? How we could fix that? Well, let's change our C-plane and let's put it in the right spot. Really just somewhere closer, right? And try again. So I'm going to take that, File, Export Selected. Make sure it's Adobe Illustrator, and just basically gonna cover that one up again. Where'd it go? Seriously, where'd it go? There it is. Export, yes, replace it. Yes. And let's go see how that turned out. Sometimes it updates this one, but I doubt that it will today. And let's go ahead and open that again. Update, and we should see it at least closer, but it's not there. What happened? Oh, is it there? It's just really small. Nope, still way down there. Not sure what's going on. Let's see if we can move it actually manually. So we'll take everything. In my case, let's see if I could just move it. Nope. Maybe my C-plane didn't move anything after all. Let's try the real manual method. We'll select everything, just use our up arrows. Yeah, it's completely off the drawing, so that's okay. Well, just give up. No, I'm just kidding. We have it at 0, 0, so I wonder what's going on. Let's try our C-plane again. And this time, let's choose world. And we'll call it our front world. Yeah, see, it defaulted back. And that looks relatively actually the spot that we put it in Illustrator. So in my case, I'm going to go the other way. Instead of moving the C-plane, I'm going to move it back to where it is. And let's see if that makes a difference. Let's try again. File, Export Selected. And let's go ahead and put it in the right spot. Replace. Still the same. Now let's try that one. So in our case, the world C-plane wasn't moving, so it may have something to do with that. I don't want to get so much into what that is, but remember, the program doesn't always know where 0, 0 is, and if you're moving 0, 0 all the time, well, things can get chaotic. Don't save. Let's try again. Update. Any closer? Hey, there it is. So it did have something to do with our world seaplane. But again, not the end of the world. But it is looking pretty good. And it's actually to scale. Did you guys see that? The 11 by 17 is the 11 by 17. Again, it's because we didn't select that preserve. So in our case, let's go to document setup, edit artboards, and change that to 11 by 17. So 11 by 17. And it should get pretty darn close. So in my case, I can select everything and dial it in. Almost. Something's a little bit off about that, but not the end of the world. Nobody would ever have to know. From here, we're gonna essentially do everything that we're normally doing, right? Changing the line weights, changing the size of things. Let's do that real quick. Of course, since I have everything nicely layered, it's a matter of just changing the color and line weight. All I gotta do is select each box. So easy. What a game changer compared to Graphics 2. And my paper space. Well, I don't want to change that because it'll change everything. But that's looking pretty sweet. Let's get my hatches I did. So, may need to actually see what my layer is called. There we go, vertical columns. Sweet. So we can take those pieces. There we go. I don't have to be that pochade. Oh, that's looking pretty good. Let's take each of those pieces. Don't get me wrong. Sometimes you gotta get them. At least these are relatively easy to get. And we can switch this. Oh. Doesn't look like they're closed. Otherwise, I'd be able to change those. But if they're not closed, and I didn't hatch them, I don't know if I got those. I guess I could fake it, right? I could just make a rectangle. That little box. And make another one. However, I don't want to sit there and do that all day either. So I would probably want to check my hatches, make sure that I got them all, right? But that's looking pretty good. Of course, I'll have up arrows and all kinds of things that are really nice. My topography, I probably should have changed. In my case, I can select same appearance and probably get all those. Maybe even change it to a dash or just something really light. That's looking nice. And I don't know, I like the dash look for topography. So I'm gonna go with my lines, more options. Change it to a dash line. Keep in mind that that could mean actually all these little tiny lines in there. So we'll see what that does. Sweet. Not too shabby. But yeah, definitely not a bad line weight. From here, I'd want to do each of those, right? So, I mean, don't get me wrong, I could add another artboard to here. That might make my layers a little bit messy. And to be fair, you might want to actually do each drawing one at a time in Photoshop. Some people do it together. I don't know how, but you'd have to have a really strong computer to do so. I'm not a fan. But from here, just to go over the process, right, because I know we don't have a whole lot of time to just get into everything, we're going to go ahead and open that file or make a new one, right? So don't get me wrong, we could save this as a PDF and we can open it, or we can just go ahead and make a new file. So make new. Since we already have our layers, we have already things set up and everything like that. So width of 11 and 17 high. I'm going to choose a resolution of actually 350 because I want those lines to come in really crisp, and I'm just a stickler for perfection. And if you have a computer that can handle it, right, I'd go with 16-bit color and RGB color. In our case, yeah, just make sure that you don't choose lab color, things like that. White background and things like this, it should be good. Go ahead and create. And from here, you should be able to actually select everything. So if you don't know how to select everything, you can go to select all, right? You can also click on every single bit of your layers. But in my case, I'm just going to simply drag it into Photoshop. So I'm going to take any of my lines. Again, make sure that you change the line weight first. Quite literally drag it into Photoshop. And just like that, it comes in as its own smart object. Now the reason I do that is because, well, it won't change the scale, it won't change the line weights, and it immediately changes this as a smart component. So there's some advantages there, right? To be fair, like I said, you can turn it into a PDF and you can open that PDF in Photoshop, but I don't know. It's kind of your own preference again. But in our case, what's kind of nice about that is it's going to line up to at least some of the elements and it'll stay the exact same size. You'll notice it's stuck in a transformation mode when you bring it in, right? So for instance, you can still spin it, you can still turn things, you can still mirror them, right? So be careful about accidentally clicking some of those things, because I've definitely done it in the past. I've been like, where did I go wrong? And it must have been when I transferred it in. It's very easy. What kind of my pet peeve about this little toolbar they've added is like it comes up everywhere. So if you do want it to only come up in one spot, you do essentially have to like move it there. The only thing that sucks is it goes back to a default when you close Photoshop anyway. So again, maybe they're listening to me right now and working on that very problem. But we're gonna go ahead and hit done, and right away you'll see that it went from a vector program to essentially a rasterized image. So like if you take a look at the circle, it's definitely a series of pixels now. That'll never get better. That'll never get, well, I guess technically you could make it worse if you wanted to, but it'll never get better. It'll stay at that 350 DPI because we dragged it in from Illustrator. However, if you took a look at Illustrator and you zoomed in like crazy, you'll notice that you'll never see those. You'll just never see it. Like we can zoom in forever, and that's because it's calculated, right? So again, if you're wanting that perfection that you see in Illustrator, and trust me, some people can tell, right? Especially professors and things like that. Most beginner students are like, what? It looks great. And they, maybe even get a magnifying glass and actually see that it's pixelated. So don't get me wrong, 400 DPI. The max that a printer can print, usually, typically, by default, is 600 DPI. To be fair though, most computers, except maybe these ones, can't really run drawings in a preview mode that way. So just keep that in mind. Sometimes our idea of perfection isn't actually seen on the printer, right? So don't get me wrong, if you're trying to do 1200 DPI, you're never gonna see it, right? Even on a printer. So just to kind of explain that a little bit, from here though, so I'm gonna go ahead and minimize that so we don't confuse ourselves. From Photoshop, however, we now have this really awesome template or coloring book like I was mentioning earlier, right? We can definitely use this, and I'm gonna go over some techniques in part 3. However, for the end of part 2, I do wanna get into some of the unique tips and tools that we can use in here, and basically go over floor plan first. So, a couple of things just to explain the UI. I haven't talked about Photoshop yet, have I? I don't think I have for this class. Sorry, you do this every semester and you're like, wait, where am I, right? How many times have I actually said this and things like that? But we have our base lines. So you'll notice that, well, a lot of the interface works just like any other Adobe program. And to be fair, if it wasn't for this Adobe Photoshop 2025 at the top, I'd honestly forget sometimes that I'm in other programs. So do be careful about these things. You'll be looking for a tool and you'll be like, oh, I'm in Illustrator, that's why I can't find it, right? So keep that in mind. We have the exact same thing where if you click on that top box, you do want to be in Essentials. I don't know why they haven't gone Classic. Photoshop's the oldest one. How there's not an Essentials Classic for this one, but one for the newer. Anyway, I don't know who's working at Adobe, but they don't have their stuff together, kind of like the people at Apple. But let's go with the Essentials, because I think by default it actually is in like photography, and you'll notice there's just a lot of different tools and different settings and things like that, just like the other programs. So again, we'll switch to Essentials, and you'll notice by default it's kind of like its own layer, right? So we have a background layer and essentially our vector smart object. To be fair, we can still change those, but not really. Like if I want to change the color, like, oh man, that was too dark, you'll notice I try to click on something, but it won't do anything because now it's basically a rasterized object. Now, to be fair, like I said, we can use it as a coloring template. So, well, we have a couple of tools. My favorite tool being the polygonal lasso tool. If you right click on some of these tools, you'll notice that there's even more sub tools. Now, by default, it's sort of this lasso tool, and I'm not going to lie to you, that's not exactly accurate. And to be fair, extremely slow, right? If I'm trying to make a coloring book, well, maybe I can hold shift. No, it's just not straight, right? Maybe if I was doing something or selecting something organic, that would be great, but definitely not what we need. In my case, my favorite use is the polygonal lasso tool, in which, well, we do a lot of straight edge things in architecture. So if I hold shift and basically just click on the points, I can select a lot of things, right? So in my case, I'm just trying to get all these stairs. And maybe I want a more concrete look, right? Maybe not everything is resolved essentially by just rendering stuff out with shade and shadow and all those things. Don't get me wrong, we could, especially in a drawing like this, but very often a floor plan doesn't have shade and shadow because, well, think about it, when you cut something in Rhino, guess what it's going to produce? The shadows of all those cuts. And there's a reason why we don't do shadows in sections because, again, there's no shadows from the building technically being cut in real life, right? We're going to have some sort of interior lighting or something like that. Or like this room that has no windows. We're never going to get any sunlight in here. So it doesn't make a lot of sense to put shade and shadow in places where we're never going to see them. So in my case, maybe I want to change actually the concreteness. Maybe I just want to go for a slightly grayer look. Maybe something a little bit more textured. So I'm going to click on brush for my brush tool and maybe, I don't know, choose something a little bit more brush-like. Or concrete-like. In my case, I'm going to go with like a crown, because why not, right? And I can basically fill that in. You'll notice I can go anywhere I want because I've already selected that piece. Now, I don't really want to do it on my lines, so I'm going to actually make a new layer, and I'm going to call it concrete. In my case, I want the lines to be above what I'm drawing. So I'm going to put my lines above what I'm drawing. However, I can only draw in the layer that I want. Don't get me wrong, I can draw on 2 layers at a time, but don't necessarily want to. But I do want to make sure I'm on the concrete layer. That way, if I do mess up, I can always change some things. Right, so just to kind of show you what I mean, I'm going for a concrete look here, so I do want a little bit of messiness here. Don't get me wrong, I don't want to take a year and a day. And I can get some overlap, some darkness in there. After all, you know, I do want it to look somewhat realistic, so I'll get some darker areas. And we'll fake it till we make it today. Maybe a highlight kind of in the concrete a little bit. You guys know what I'm talking about? Maybe you do, maybe you don't. Usually we go for a vignette look, a little darker in the corner areas, if you will. A little bit of highlights there. But I think overall you kind of get the idea. We don't want to spice it up too much. You want to kind of maintain the same angles as if you were an artist, and architects are definitely artistes. And that's looking pretty good. But from there, I can lighten it and really give it a concrete feel, right, to say the least. Now, it's a bit much, and to be fair, you're never going to see the drawing this big. It's going to look more like... Oh, I can't even zoom out, can I? The correct size is... Wait, can we get 11 by 17? Oh, we have another piece of paper. But relatively speaking, it's only going to be about that big. So don't get me wrong, some of this big texture stuff, it looks really big on the computer and it may look really nice, but you might realize, whoa, I got either too big of a scale or maybe sometimes even too small. So keep that in mind, that the drawing's only going to be so big. Right. And to be fair, that's actually pretty close to, well, to scale. Right? We can even see what it looks like to scale. So maybe zoom in a little bit. So don't get me wrong, we're going to see about that much texture. Right? But what's kind of nice, and especially with the projectors and the ability that you get, anybody can plug their computer into them. You do have this ability. In fact, we used to do this in painting class all the time. We get a projector, we put our canvas up there, we put our Photoshop drawings, and then we just trace them on there, right, on the canvas. We take that off the projector and start painting it. And people would be like, "What? How did you paint this?" We're like, tools, man, right? Tools. In fact, someone even claimed that the Mona Lisa was made that way, right? And in fact, more actually an obscure image that was on the image. That's how actually some of the Renaissance painting made those wonderful landscapes and all those things, because they didn't do it by hand. They were basically just tracing an image, right? And it was a well-kept secret. Why? Because you looked really awesome. You paid thousands of dollars maybe for that one compared to the medieval guy who was like still trying to figure out perspective. And you know what I'm talking about? Anyway, if you've looked at classical art, has anybody taken an art appreciation class? Yeah, there's like nothing but artworks, right? You really owe it to yourself. I know sometimes classes aren't on like your degree plan, but you'd be surprised like how many of them you're like, whoa, I'm going to know more than the rest of the architects around me because of it. But that's looking pretty good, at least in terms of a concrete texture. In my case, some of the commands that I can go over, you'll notice that you still see the ants marching, right, if you will, for the concrete layer. What's kind of nice about this is I can turn that layer off and try again on a new layer. So I don't know, maybe I wanted actually like a wood feel or something. So I'm going to type maybe wood siding or wood flooring or something. So I can try that again and I can maintain the same selection. I don't even have to like do that selection over and over again. So in my case, let's go for a wood look. I'm going to choose Christmas lights. That's hilarious. Anyway, I've got all these for you guys, by the way. We need to basically load them on each computer, but I don't know, let's go for something that's kind of at least wood texture-y. That's looking pretty cool. I don't know what it does yet, but wood flooring, I can't really see it. It's probably because drawing in white or something. No. Where am I? Am I drawing it? Can't really tell, can you? Oh, that's why. No? Not sure what's going on there. Could be my screen recording, I'm not gonna lie to you. Could be this brush. No. Let's try a brush that works. No. Uh-oh. My screen recording is probably... Alright, let's minimize the program real quick. Try again. Might be because I have a bunch of programs open too. But you should be able to have no problem, so... Again, not sure what's going on there. I can't do anything. What the heck? Nothing. So, you shouldn't have this problem. I'm going to go ahead and save and close my Photoshop real quick. That might help me out. Most of us are probably not screen recording while we're working, so you shouldn't have this problem. But if your program ever like stops working, again, best thing to do is restart it, right? Especially on a Mac, and especially while screen recording. Video stuff with Mac can sometimes be tricky. Test. I'll put it on our desktop just so I can find it again real quick. Press OK. I'll close that out real quick. And I'll go ahead and close out my Illustrator if that's taking up too much of my... Don't save. And we'll go ahead and close that as well, because that's probably taken up a lot of my stuff. Let's try again. Now, I won't get my original selection, but I should have, again, some of my stuff back. And let's see if my brush tool is working now. Brush. Okay, now my brush tool is working. So again, I'm not sure what's going on there, but again, clearly restarting the program will work out for you. But let's again, maybe I didn't want a concrete method, and maybe I don't necessarily want to select that again. In my case, I may have to, or I might even try a different way. So other tools that I could use are such as the Magic Wand tool. However, it's not always magical, and keep in mind that it's only going to apply the tool to the layer that you're selected. So right now, if I'm selected on concrete, you're going to see like this weird magic concrete texture because, well, it's following the layer that I selected, right? In this case, I can't even see it. So do be sure that you select the layer that you do want to work with. So in my case, I thought I called this line work. Right? So I like to keep track of my line work for sure, because I use it like a template. And you'll notice when I click inside these little boxes, right, it actually gets each one. Well, kinda, right? If I hold shift, I can really get each one. And it gets some of those arrow anomalies in there. You see the arrow in there? So it's still there, right? And it's still catching all the little pieces that are really there. We can also change the tolerance of it. I think by default is 32. Keep in mind that the higher the number, the more pixels it'll capture. So if it's capturing too many pixels, turn down the layer. But in my case, let's say I wanted to go for a more wood look. I'm gonna go to my wood flooring. I'm gonna change it to like a wood color. So, I don't know, like a yellowish kind of brown in there. Yeah, it's looking pretty good. I'm gonna go with my brush tool. I'm gonna hold shift. I don't really want that texture anymore. So let's try something like that. Ooh, there we go. Oh. So in my case, I'm just kind of faking it till I make it. A little bit of darker areas in there, but just maintaining that direction. Right? In my case, just kind of going back and forth. And it's kind of randomizing it. If I was doing this on the Wacom, I'd really randomize it because it would be based on my pen direction and everything like that. Kind of want my stairs to look a little different, I guess. And don't get me wrong, you could probably make a pretty straight line even with your mouse. Kind of like when it's a little off, you know what I mean? A little bit of diagonals in there, but not too many. I don't want them to know that I did it in Photoshop. Right? Oh. But if I hold shift, I can make perfectly straight lines, and that's kind of nice. We can get some anomalies in there, like some different yellowish colors, because wood isn't always the same color, is it? In fact, we can make some of those wood pieces a little smaller. And again, a couple of anomalies in there, to say the least. But that's looking pretty good. A little too bold, if you ask me, so I'm going to take that down. Because again, at the end of the day, it's about my architecture, my line weight, not necessarily the material. But now I can choose between concrete, right, and wood. So don't get me wrong, we can texturize these things using our brush tools. And to be fair, we do have to take things back because, again, the architecture is more important than the color or the referencing material and things like that. From here, let's say I wanted to, I don't know, change the ground. Totally could. And especially with Photoshop, with AI abilities, you can do lots of things. So in my case, I'm going to make a new layer and call it topography. Or topo for today. And we'll go ahead and put it on the bottom layer, just because, well, it's not my background layer, but I do want it to kind of get in there, right, in terms of the background. And don't get me wrong, this one might be easier with a lasso tool, and we just go around the object. So, okay, so I'm going to hold shift and basically just trace my object real quick. I could try the magic wand tool, but I have a feeling not everything is closed. So in my case, I'm going to fake it till I make it. Keep in mind that this layer is going to be above, so I can kind of do whatever I want as long as I know that certain layers are going to hide things. Hopefully that makes sense. But in my case, I'm going to click on the line for the most part, just to kind of show that off a little bit more. And again, just double clicking anywhere will close a line as well, so keep that in mind. From here, I do want to kind of add to some, like maybe that's the ground inside here, so maybe I want to add to that selection. So in my case, I'm going to hold command, or in my case, you'll see that there's an option to minus or plus. So in my case, I'm going to plus and add to my selection. Maybe I want to go around this piece. Yeah, probably. Probably should have used the magic wand tool for this one. Get a little more accurate there. But that's looking pretty sweet. But now we got that piece, we got that piece. Actually, I needed the inverse of it, my bad. So in my case, select the inverse and now get this piece. That's why. Oh, we can do it in another tool. Oh, but I did it in the wrong one. So let's go back. Even I mess up. We got the marching ants again. That's okay. Make sure that you're in the right layer, right? Such as your line work, and then you use your tool, hold shift, and we can add to that selection. So yeah, you can use multiple tools, multiple selections. But I don't know about you, I like a green grass, so I'm gonna go with a brush tool. Do something really soft and really big so I don't have to sit there all day. And grass isn't that green, right? That's looking pretty sweet. And as you can see, it's kind of a little brushy. I kind of want that brushiness, but I don't know, it's looking a little stark to me. So I want a little fuzz in there. Oh, maybe redo that last one. Redo magic wand, there we go. Make sure it's on my topography layer, by the way. Don't know if I got that. I want a little bit more yellow in there. There we go. And brush tool. I don't know, I kind of want that fuzzier look. Less hardness. And it still looks really harsh. Let's go with a lower opacity maybe. Smoothing. It's definitely got a look. Maybe we get some texture in there. Oh, I do have this one that looks like grass. Can't say that that's going to be helpful, but... And it looks like it's more in an elevation than anything. But maybe it gives us some texture, let's see. Okay, too much texture. Right, but clearly definitely something usable maybe for our elevation. But again, we got some leaves over here, that's pretty sweet. Let's try those. That might work. After all, I just kind of want to use it for the texture. I'm going to end up blurring this out quite a bit just because, well, I need the lines to be more apparent. But I like hot spots, right? And dark spots. So, good texture. Let's dial that back. Dial it back even more. And Command D to deselect something. You'll notice I still have the running ants. So we'll deselect it. That's actually looking pretty nice. Again, I can still see most of my line weight. Right? But again, I'm not so focused on what it's colored like, but what it refers to. Right? And it definitely starts to speak a little bit more about my drawing. Right? Maybe even a little too light. So don't get me wrong, we can still do a lot of things to our line work. So for instance, our line work, we can even bulk it up and do layers on it. So we'll do Command L. In my case, I'm going to use an automatic, and don't get me wrong, I can really darken it up or lighten it up. So I don't know. Don't get me wrong, that's something I should have done in Illustrator, but if I'm noticing with all my amounts of colors and things like that, that I may need to increase my line weight with my layers. Right? So that's looking pretty sweet. Maybe the wood itself is, maybe I'm not a huge fan of the color. Maybe I can change that color, absolutely. So image, adjustments, and I could change that color a lot of ways, but color balance is definitely a good one, right? So I can, man, I want it to be more blue. Okay, well then make it more blue. No, it's too blue. Make it a little bit more yellow. So I mean, don't get me wrong, little movements actually make more of an impact than big movements, I would say, when it comes to architecture. I don't know, maybe you wanted that a different color, so we can go to adjustments and we can even say replace color. You'd be like, well, take that color and instead of that color, make it, I don't know, green, right? So, I mean, don't get me wrong, we can fix a lot of things in Photoshop. And to be fair, this is just part one of like using Photoshop. I mean, we could go on this for days. I mean, we could make a whole class just about Photoshop. And to be fair, that's what I kind of like to do in Graphics 3 and Graphics 4. A huge part of my Graphics 3 and 4 is really just teaching you Photoshop and Illustrator. But again, I like to introduce it in computer graphics because, well, it kind of goes hand in hand with all those things you're doing, right? That, and I don't teach them make 2D stuff or modeling in those Graphics 3 and Graphics 4. They do this a little bit more like to their own hand drafted drawings. We scan them in, and then we start to fill things in. So, I mean, don't get me wrong, there's a digital method and there's an analog method. And it's funny is they both use the same tools in Photoshop. So don't get me wrong, it's definitely useful, but you might as well do it the right way the first time. But for today, I think I'm gonna leave it there, and I'm gonna do the elevation part 3 in on part 3, or in Illustrator on part 3. But just to recap, I know I closed some things out, but we went over a little bit more of the clipping planes in Rhinoceros. We went over some of the scaling tools that we'd have to do in order to make scale drawings absolutely easy for us. And then we learned a little bit about the workflow. Of course, still using Illustrator to control our line weights and dial those in, but then our drag and drop method into Photoshop. So don't get me wrong, some of you guys are like, do we really have to use 4 different programs for a drawing? The answer is yes. In fact, I would say that's what actually makes our architect students a lot stronger than any other student, because, well, any other student, you may have even heard of it. Some students are like, sir, you don't use Inventor? Inventor does all, right? Oh, sir, you don't use SolidWorks? SolidWorks does all, right? Well, good for you. What about when your computer doesn't have SolidWorks? Can't do anything? Well, yeah. That's why we're a little bit better, is because we know a little bit about every single program there is out there. So we get to talk to the engineers and they know what we're doing, right? We get to talk to the mathematicians and we know we get to talk to the graphic designers and they know what we're doing. We get to talk to the photographers and we know what we're doing. You see what I'm saying? Or that engineer, he talks to the photographer, he has no idea what he's doing. Architects are expected to know a little bit about everything. That's why we're highly regarded in society. Oh, you're an architect, you must be intelligent. And that's more than often very true, right, to say the very least. But as in a recap for today, and with 20 minutes left in the class, I will go ahead and end it for today. Unless there's some specific questions that came up. Is there anything that maybe was kind of on the back of the mind? I know Kim caught up on some Z's. Anybody else? Obviously, we'll leave it to part 3. But keep in mind, guys, you can ask questions at really any time. It's not super formal, as you guys know. And you could totally hear your voice in answering your questions. So we'll leave it at that for today. I'll go ahead and save. And